Why did the warning come from her, and why was no one listening? That was the question echoing in Colonel James Blackwood's mind as he watched Bravo Company step into the valley. The air was thin, heavy with the kind of silence that only came before violence, yet the officers around him treated it like any other morning patrol. 32 Marines moving in clean formation, weapons raised, eyes scanning the terrain. Young, steady, trusting. Too trusting. The Hindu Kush loomed jagged in the distance, their shadows long across the parched earth. Blackwood had been in wars long enough to recognize the pattern. He felt it in his chest, in the slight tremor of old scar tissue tightening under his ribs. This wasn't calm. This was the stillness of a trap being set. And he knew the one person who had already seen it, who had spoken up, was Staff Sergeant Riley Calloway, hidden on the northern ridge 3 days prior, watching with the patience of someone who understood what silence concealed. But her warnings had been dismissed. "She's outside her sector," Warren had said yesterday, voice sharp enough to cut steel. "Secondary overwatch doesn't dictate operational parameters." Blackwood hadn't argued. Not in front of the men. Not in front of a commander whose pride already bristled at the thought of a female sniper correcting his plan. Still, he'd felt the weight of her words, the detail in her report, the calm precision of her voice when she'd radioed him what she saw, patterns of movement in the dried riverbed, the kind that didn't belong to wandering shepherds or random fighters. 30 men, maybe more, setting up kill zones with crew-served weapons. He'd heard her tone, the kind that came not from imagination but from experience, from knowing how death arranged itself in terrain. And yet here they were, 32 Marines filing into the valley floor. The command center hummed with static voices. Screens flickered with drone feeds, heat signatures blending into rocks and shadows. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio, calm, professional, announcing an all clear from the western ridge. No movement detected. Blackwood's jaw tightened. Morrison was competent, but his angle couldn't see what Calloway saw. She learned to read landscapes the way some men read maps. Blackwood had trained shooters before, had built programs designed to find those rare few who could see what others couldn't. And Calloway, though she carried another name now, was the living proof of that legacy. He knew it the moment he heard her cadence, the silence between her words, the restraint in her voice when she described danger that others waved off as paranoia. And yet Warren refused to budge. From the corner of the room, the comms officer spoke quickly. "Overwatch 2 requests permission to engage Grid 41's new 123456. Multiple hostiles spotted." Warren snatched the handset. "Negative, Overwatch 2, maintain position, observe only." Her reply came calm but insistent. "Sir, I have eyes on at least 30 fighters, crew-served weapons. They're establishing crossfire." "Maintain radio discipline, Sergeant. That's an order." Then it came, the thunder. Not from the sky, not from any storm, from her rifle. The command post shuddered with the sound, carried even across the mountains. The Barrett M82 spoke in its deep, resonant boom, the unmistakable crack of 50 caliber steel ripping air and distance. Blackwood's eyes flicked to the monitors. On the valley floor, figures erupted from the earth like shadows unmasked, Taliban fighters spilling from the riverbed, caught mid-preparation, their leader collapsing before he could give the signal. Another shot, another figure fell. Chaos detonated all at once. Radios screaming, Morrison reporting unexpected contact, Bravo scrambling to cover as ambush positions opened fire too early, triggered by panic. Warren slammed his fist on the table. "Overwatch 2, cease fire immediately. That's a direct order." But the rifle thundered again. Blackwood felt it deep in his chest, the rhythm he knew like a heartbeat. 4 shots in quick succession, then a pause. Then another 3. It was the ghost shot protocol, his protocol, born decades ago in a different war under a different name. A method not written into manuals, not taught in schools, but passed through the hands of only a few. He hadn't fired a rifle in years, but his legacy lived in the cadence of her trigger finger. She wasn't improvising, she was saving them. On the screens, Marines found cover, fire returning, steadied by the invisible hand of the sniper on the ridge. Fighters collapsed one by one, their heavy weapons silenced before they could cut into Bravo's lines. It wasn't chaos, it was precision. Still, Warren roared into the mic. "Staff Sergeant Calloway, respond now or face court-martial." There was a pause long enough to feel intentional. Then her voice came through, steady, almost serene. "With respect, sir, I'm a bit busy at the moment." Another shot cracked, another hostile down. For a moment, even the hardened men in the command tent froze, staring at the screens as if they were watching something impossible. One woman, one rifle, unraveling an entire ambush before their eyes. Blackwood let a breath escape, something between relief and sorrow. He'd seen this story play out too many times. Talented shooters dismissed for being different, saving lives in ways their commanders would never admit. Pride and prejudice, again and again. For 23 minutes the valley burned, then quieted. 16 Taliban lay scattered, their ambush torn apart before it could begin. Bravo Company, rattled but alive, secured the ground. On the ridge, her rifle fell silent at last. Warren's voice cold as steel. "Overwatch 2, report to command immediately." "Roger that, sir. ETA 40 minutes." Her words carried no defiance, no pride, no anger, just duty. As if the world hadn't nearly come apart, as if she hadn't just saved 32 lives by defying him. Warren stormed from the room, fury radiating off him. The screens dimmed as feeds cycled out. Only Blackwood remained, staring at the ghost-like trail of smoke drifting from the ridgeline where she had fired. He closed his eyes. The ghosts always returned. And just like that, he was back. Back decades earlier, standing rigid before a desk of dark oak in Fort Bragg, long before Calloway, long before Afghanistan. Colonel Sullivan's voice echoed in memory. "The Soviets are winning the long-range game. They're fielding shooters we can't match. It's time we build something new, a program that doesn't officially exist, and you're going to run it." Ghost Shot, that was the name. Invisible operators who fought wars in silence, who altered history with single bullets. Not soldiers who received medals, shadows who never even received names. Back then the files had been thin, just 3 women in the candidate stack. The system didn't train women to fight, but the Soviets did, and they were winning. Blackwood remembered the knock on his door, the man who entered. Harrison Hayes, Predator's eyes, the best sniper alive, and his quiet confession, "The finest natural shooter I've ever seen is my daughter." That's where it began. A daughter, a program, a lineage. And now here she was. Decades later, different name, same bloodline carrying forward the unacknowledged legacy. Calloway, Hayes, Catherine, different masks for the same ghost. Blackwood opened his eyes, staring at the silent screens. Somewhere out there, she was packing her rifle, preparing to face Warren's fury. He knew exactly what would happen next. She'd stand at attention, take his reprimand, endure his contempt. She'd say little. She always did. Because Calloway knew something Warren never would. Ghosts didn't need recognition. They didn't need permission. They existed to act when others hesitated. And that, Blackwood thought, was both their gift and their curse. Outside, dawn crested the mountains at last, washing the valley in red-gold light. It could have been the glow of morning. It could have been the stain of blood. In either case, 32 Marines lived to see it. And one woman stood on the ridge, silent, her rifle cooling, knowing the war with her commander had only just begun. Sometimes, Blackwood thought, the most dangerous battlefield wasn't the valley below. It was the space between pride and truth, between orders and what must be done. And today, once again, it had been a ghost who carried the burden of that choice. How do you train someone to disappear? That was the question that haunted Captain James Blackwood as he stood at Fort Bragg in 1975, staring at the faces of recruits who didn't yet understand the life being asked of them. They weren't just training for war. They were training to become myths. Colonel Victor Sullivan had given him the directive with his usual steel-edged calm. The Soviets have shooters we cannot match. You will create ghosts, men and women who move unseen, who strike before the enemy knows they're hunted. There will be no parades, no medals, only shadows, only silence. It wasn't the rifle that mattered, Sullivan had said. It was the mind behind it. And Blackwood knew from the very first day that most of these young men would wash out, not because they couldn't shoot, but because they couldn't live with the silence after the shot. Then there was Hayes, Harrison Hayes. The man had eyes like frost-bitten steel, pale blue and unflinching. He walked into Blackwood's quarters without introduction, without hesitation, carrying the air of a predator who had hunted all his life. Sullivan had vouched for him. Best sniper in American service. Record kills you'll never see on paper. He'll be your senior instructor. Blackwood remembered the moment as if carved into stone. The pause, the wait, the way Hayes had studied him. Then those words. The best natural shooter I've ever seen isn't in uniform. She's my daughter. She's 19. It had shocked Blackwood at first. The military didn't field women in combat roles, let alone as snipers. But Hayes's voice carried no doubt, no plea, only certainty. I support putting the best shooter behind the rifle, regardless of what bathroom they use. That was the seed. That was where the wall cracked. Weeks later, Blackwood stood in the cold North Carolina woods, watching 16 recruits struggle through the brutal course he designed. 12 men, 4 women. Already half had failed. The rest were pushed past exhaustion, crawling through mud, navigating terrain without maps, forced to endure isolation so complete it gnawed at their sanity. But one woman stood out. Catherine Hayes, Harrison's daughter. She moved differently than the rest, not faster, not stronger, but quieter, as if the forest itself bent to hide her. Where the others forced their way through branches, she slipped between them. Where others fired their rifles with technical precision, she fired with something more, instinct. As if she could feel the wind before it shifted, as if the bullet belonged to her long before it left the barrel. On a December morning, Blackwood watched her final evaluation, a simulated high-value elimination in a mock village, enemy patrols sweeping the streets. Catherine slid into position unseen, chambered around and exhaled. The target fell before the opposing force even realized where death had come from. By the time they scrambled, she was gone, vanished like a ghost. She's the best, Blackwood admitted quietly. Beside him, Harrison Hayes lowered his binoculars. His face gave nothing away, but his voice carried weight. She'll never get the recognition she deserves, but make sure she comes home alive. The world may never know her name, but I will. Blackwood had carried that promise in silence for years. Catherine Hayes became the sharpest blade in the ghost shot arsenal. 23 confirmed strategic eliminations between 1977 and 1988. Soviet officers, insurgent leaders, men whose deaths changed the course of battles that were never recorded in headlines, always alone, always vanishing. Until Nicaragua. The file remained classified. Even Blackwood didn't know the full truth. Only fragments, a mission against Sandinista commanders, an ambush on civilians. Catherine saved a village, but didn't return. Some said she was betrayed, others that she sacrificed herself knowingly. Blackwood never spoke of it. Harrison never forgave the silence. But Catherine left something behind, a daughter. Years later, on a Montana ranch, 12-year-old Kate Hayes squinted through a scope while her grandfather corrected her breathing. Inhale, hold, exhale halfway, squeeze, ping. The steel plate rang 700 yards away. Again, ping, again. The rhythm was in her blood. She didn't know then. Not really. She thought her mother had died in a car accident, that her grandfather was just a rancher with an unusual obsession for precision shooting. But one summer evening, Harrison placed a leather journal in her hands. A journal filled with numbers, wind calls, calculations written in a neat feminine script. "That was your mother," he said quietly. "Her gift wasn't just shooting. She could read terrain, read wind, read the world itself." Kate turned the pages, the weight of the truth pressing down on her. "Your mother didn't die in a car accident," Harrison said at last. His pale blue eyes, so much like her own, didn't waver. "She died serving her country in ways you'll never read in a book. She was a ghost, and someday they'll come looking for you too." The words lodged deep. She didn't ask for them, she didn't want them, but they stayed. When the towers fell on September 11th, Kate Hayes was a sophomore at Montana State. She watched the smoke rise on television, surrounded by classmates who couldn't comprehend what war meant. That night, she called her grandfather. "It's time." And Harrison, with no hesitation, only said, "I know." She enlisted within days. Her skill caught attention instantly. West Point, top of her class in marksmanship, tactics, endurance, but she also caught the wrong kind of attention. Major Marcus Warren. Warren embodied the institution, rigid, conventional, bound by doctrine. He pushed her harder than anyone else, dismissed her insights, mocked her independence. "This isn't a Hollywood sniper fantasy," he once sneered at her during training. "This is combat. You follow the book or people die." But she had already learned. Sometimes the book got people killed. Blackwood saw it too. Older now, officially a Pentagon advisor but still carrying the ghost shot legacy. He watched her in silence, recognizing the rhythm, the eyes, the calm in her breathing. Catherine Hayes's daughter. When he finally approached her, he said the words no one else could. "I knew your mother." For the first time, Kate's composure faltered. Ghosts don't exist. Not in books, not in records, but in her blood they did. And Blackwood, with quiet conviction, told her what he'd told her mother decades earlier. The wars ahead won't be won by battalions. They'll be won by ghosts, by one shot in the right place. Kate had listened. And though Warren resisted, though the institution doubted, though the weight of silence pressed heavy, she carried forward the legacy. By Iraq, 2004, she was already something more than a soldier. She was Phantom, the sniper who pulled triggers in silence, who defied orders to save lives, who stood in the long shadow of her mother and her grandfather. And yet, beneath the calm, the precision, the legend whispered by others, there remained the ache of what she'd never known. Her mother's face beyond faded photographs, the truth of what happened in Nicaragua, the cost of every shot she took. Because ghosts weren't immortal, they weren't untouchable. They were human. And every shot, no matter how clean, left an echo. What happens when the enemy you fight isn't just across the battlefield, but sitting in the command tent with you? That was the question Kate Hayes faced in Iraq, 2004, long before Afghanistan, long before the ridgeline where her rifle thundered against Warren's orders. The desert was not forgiving. Heat shimmered off the rooftops of Fallujah, distorting air like a mirage. Dust hung heavy, coating gear, lungs, even thought itself. Marines moved like shadows between crumbled concrete, chasing insurgents who always seemed 2 steps ahead. IEDs tore through convoys daily. Snipers waited in minarets, firing down at patrols with patient cruelty. And through it all, Kate learned that the war wasn't just about firepower. It was about patience. About who could outlast the silence. Her call sign was Phantom. Not given by command, command would never admit to giving a woman such a title, but whispered among Marines who returned from patrol alive because a bullet had struck from somewhere unseen. They told stories of her like ghost tailies, never with her name, never with official acknowledgement. Just the phantoms watching. "Don't worry, someone got your 6." But Warren hated it. "Stop playing hero," he told her one night in the command center, map spread across the table, sweat streaking his brow. "You think you see things no one else does. You think you can rewrite orders with that rifle of yours. This isn't a legacy. This is insubordination dressed up as instinct." Kate didn't answer. She never did when he wanted a fight. She only looked at the map at the red excess where Marines had died, and in the silence, Warren mistook her restraint for defiance. The next day, a convoy rolled into an alley he had designated clear. Kate, from her hidden perch, spotted the telltale glint, wires strung too carefully, shadows that didn't belong. She radioed in a warning. Warren dismissed it. The convoy moved forward. The blast lifted steel and fire into the air. 3 Marines didn't make it out. That night Kate sat alone in the darkness, rifle across her lap, listening to the cries in the casualty tent. She told herself it wasn't her fault, that she had spoken, that she had done her part. But the guilt pressed heavy, unrelenting, because deep down she knew she could have pulled the trigger on the insurgent setting the detonator. She had him in her sights. She had waited for approval, and in waiting, lives had been lost. It was then she decided, never again. She would carry the silence, she would carry the blame, but she would not carry hesitation. From that day, her shots came quicker, cleaner. They didn't always follow the book, didn't always wait for orders, and Marines lived because of it. The stories grew. Phantom dropped a rooftop sniper who had terrorized patrols for weeks. Phantom eliminated a cell leader before he could coordinate an ambush. Phantom's bullet found the insurgent commander who thought himself untouchable in the chaos of night. But every victory carved a deeper divide between her and Warren. One night in the dim glow of lanterns, Warren confronted her again. His voice was low, almost tired. "Do you even understand what you're doing? Every time you take a shot outside my orders, you erode the chain of command. You're not saving them, Hayes. You're breaking the system that keeps them alive." She looked at him then, her voice soft, even fragile. "Sir, with respect, the system didn't save them yesterday. I did." It wasn't arrogance. It was truth. But truth has a way of cutting deeper than bullets. From that moment, Warren became not just her superior, but her adversary. He sought every chance to sideline her, to question her reports, to frame her instincts as recklessness. He ordered her reassigned more than once, only to have Blackwood intervene quietly from the Pentagon, pulling strings no one else could see. And through it all, Kate carried the silence, the weight of lives saved and the heavier weight of lives lost. Because the ghosts didn't live without scars. She still remembered the face of a boy no older than 12 holding a rifle too heavy for his small frame. The rules of engagement said clear target. The Marines on the ground begged for her to fire, but her finger froze. In that split second he pulled the trigger. A Marine fell. Only then did she fire. The boy dropped, lifeless, dust rising around him. That night she couldn't breathe. She vomited until her throat burned. She tore at the journal her mother had left behind, as if its neat numbers and wind calls could explain what she had just done. But they couldn't. Her grandfather's words returned. She could read the world itself. Kate whispered into the dark, "Then why can't I read myself?" It was in those moments, when the rifle cooled, when the desert went silent, that the ghosts of Catherine and Harrison pressed down the hardest. She wasn't just fighting insurgents. She was fighting the weight of a legacy, the expectation to be flawless when perfection was impossible. And yet, despite the cracks inside her, despite Warren's fury, despite the weight of silence, she endured. She endured because Marines came home who otherwise wouldn't. Because somewhere deep down, she believed her mother would have done the same. And so the Phantom's legend grew. Not a soldier, not a hero, not even a woman in the eyes of those who told the stories, just a ghost. But Kate Hayes knew the truth. Ghosts bled. What if the orders you're given are designed to break you, not guide you? That was the thought lingering in Kate Hayes's mind as the sun bled across the Iraq horizon in 2006, when her reputation as Phantom was both her shield and her curse. Everywhere she went, whispers followed. Marines spoke of her with reverence, as if her rifle was more myth than steel. She'd saved convoys, ended ambushes, silenced rooftop killers before they could cut down squads. Yet the same name that gave comfort to men in the field made her a target in the halls of command. Major Marcus Warren wanted her gone. Officially, he said it was discipline, that her defiance undermined the chain of command, that every shot outside orders was a cancer eating away at military structure. But Kate knew the truth. It wasn't about orders. It was about pride. Pride that she had seen things he hadn't. Pride that she had acted when he froze. Pride that her instincts, honed in silence and scarred by legacy, made his authority look brittle. And so the missions he gave her grew sharper, riskier, designed not to test her but to break her. One operation still carved at her memory, a village on the outskirts of Ramadi suspected insurgent safe house. She was assigned overwatch, but the positioning was wrong, too exposed, too visible. She told Warren as much. He waved her off. The terrain's fine, stick to your post. She obeyed. Within an hour, gunfire erupted from 3 sides. Marines were pinned, caught in a kill zone she'd seen coming. Kate shifted, fired, covered them as best she could, dropping enemies before they could flank. Her shots gave the squad enough time to pull out. They survived, but one Marine didn't. Later that night, Warren's voice cut into her like shrapnel. Maybe if you focused on following orders instead of rewriting them, we wouldn't have lost a man today. Kate wanted to scream, to remind him she had warned him, begged him to reposition. But she stayed silent, jaw tight, eyes locked on the sand, because she knew the truth. The man was dead not because she disobeyed, but because she had obeyed. And that knowledge burned worse than the desert sun. The war ground on, day after day, mission after mission. She carried her rifle, carried the whispers of phantom, carried the weight of ghosts both past and present. Her mother's journal still traveled with her, tucked into the bottom of her pack. She read it sometimes in the still hours, staring at the neat handwriting, at the calculations of wind and distance. She tried to imagine her mother's voice, tried to feel her presence. But the words remained silent on the page, like secrets too heavy to speak. One night, under the thin canvas of a desert tent, Blackwood found her reading. His hair was white now, his face weathered, his presence heavier than ever. He sat without invitation, watching her thumb through the pages. "You know what she wrote in those lines, don't you?" he asked quietly. Kate shook her head. She wasn't just recording numbers, she was recording silence. The silence between each shot, the silence of waiting, the silence after. That's what makes a ghost, Hayes, not the kill. The silence you learn to live with. Kate looked at him, eyes burning. "And if I can't?" Blackwood's gaze softened, almost paternal. "Then you'll learn, or it will break you. Ghosts aren't born, they're carved." His words didn't comfort her, but they stayed. By 2007, her tour was ending. Warren had succeeded in burying her reports, cutting her influence, keeping her name from official records. Phantom was still a whisper among Marines, but in paperwork she was a footnote. That was how Warren wanted it. That was how the system erased people like her. When she rotated stateside, she told herself she was done, that she would leave the desert behind, bury the rifle, build a life untouched by war. She tried. For a while, she almost believed it. She went home to Montana, back to the ranch where her grandfather waited. The mountains were quiet, the sky open, the nights filled with stars instead of gunfire. But the silence wasn't peace. It was suffocating. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every distant crack sounded like gunfire. And in her dreams, the boy with the too heavy rifle still looked at her, still raised his weapon, still fell when she pulled the trigger too late. She woke screaming more than once. Harrison sat with her, said nothing, just poured coffee into chipped mugs at dawn and let her breathe. One morning he finally spoke. "You think the war ended when you left. It didn't. It never does. You carry it now, just like your mother, just like me." Kate stared at the rising sun, hands trembling around the mug. "Then what's the point? If it never ends, what's the point?" Harrison's voice was low, rough. "The point is this. You kept men alive who would be dead without you. That's the point. You can't change the war, but you can change who comes home from it." The word struck deep. She didn't want to go back. She wanted to bury Phantom with the desert, but the call came anyway. Afghanistan, a different war but the same silence. Warren was there too, promoted, sharper in his contempt, angrier in his pride. She almost refused, but when Blackwood called, his voice carried something more than orders. It carried the weight of inevitability. "You were born for this, Hayes," he told her. "Not because of your bloodline, because of your silence. The war in Afghanistan is eating men alive. We need a ghost." So she went. She went because she couldn't walk away. Because she couldn't bear the thought of Marines dying in valleys and mountains, while she sat on a ranch pretending ghosts didn't exist. And when she stepped off the plane into the dust and heat of Afghanistan, she told herself the same lie her mother must have told herself decades before. "One more tour, one more mission, then I'm done." But ghosts never walk away. They fade, they linger, they endure. And for Kate Hayes, Afghanistan was not the end. It was the crucible where silence itself would be tested. Because in the valleys of the Hindu Kush, where death hid in every shadow, there would come a day when Warren called for SEAL backup. And before they could arrive, Phantom's rifle would speak. Why did the valley feel like it was waiting for her? That was the thought that pressed against Kate Hayes's chest as the Chinook banked low over Afghanistan's jagged ridges, the mountains like broken teeth tearing at the sky. The war here wasn't the desert of Iraq. It wasn't alleys and concrete and hidden wires. It was mountains that swallowed men whole, ridges that turned into kill zones, caves that echoed with gunfire long after the shooters vanished. It was ancient, unforgiving, a place where armies had come for centuries and left buried. Kate had felt wars before. She had felt the silence of Fallujah rooftops, the heat of Ramadi streets, the pull of the rifle against her shoulder. But this place carried something heavier. The air itself felt hostile, like it didn't want them here, like it remembered every invader before them. She shifted in the helicopter, the Barrett across her knees, the weight both comfort and curse. Around her, younger Marines clutched rifles, their faces pale under the vibration of the rotors. They looked at her the way they always did, not knowing her name, only the whispers. Phantom, the ghost sniper, the one you never saw, only heard when her rifle spoke. She hated the name, she hated the myth, but she carried it anyway. Waiting on the tarmac when they landed was Major Warren. His face harder now, lines etched deeper, eyes sharper with the rank he'd earned. Time hadn't softened him, it had calcified him. "Hayes," he said flatly, not offering a salute, not offering acknowledgement. Just the name like a weight thrown across the ground. "Sir," she replied, voice calm, unreadable. The weeks that followed felt like walking into the same war she'd already fought, only harsher. The valleys here were traps, the fighters patient. They studied patrol routes, memorized terrain, vanished into caves the way smoke vanishes into the air. Convoys bled in ambush after ambush. Kate watched from her ridgelines, saw the patterns before they formed, reported them in steady tones. And like before, Warren dismissed them. "You see ghosts in every shadow," he said one evening in the command tent, the glow of the monitors casting his face in pale light. "No," Kate said softly, "I see men waiting to die, and I see who's going to kill them if we keep walking blind." Her voice didn't rise, it never did, but Warren bristled all the same, fury flashing in his eyes. The tension coiled tighter with each mission. She would radio warnings. He would override them. Men would walk into kill zones and come back bleeding. She would fire anyway, break silence, pull lives from the teeth of death. Warren would rage in after-action reports, framing her precision as recklessness, her instincts as disobedience. But the Marines, the ones on the ground, they whispered Phantom with something like prayer. They knew what she had done. They knew who had pulled them home. It ate at Warren, every whisper, every life saved that should have been lost under his command, every bullet that spoke louder than his orders. And then came the valley. It was late autumn when they moved Bravo Company into the sector, 32 men, fresh-faced, carrying the weight of packs heavier than their years. The valley was dry, barren, ringed by ridges that loomed too close. The kind of place no commander should send men without absolute certainty. Kate had been watching it for days. From the northern ridge she had seen the shadows move. Fighters creeping in at night, digging, wiring, preparing. 30 of them at least. Crew-served weapons positioned to cut into the valley floor like a scythe. She reported it calm, precise. Every coordinate, every pattern. Warren dismissed it again. We've swept it clean, this valley's empty. Kate held her radio in silence, staring down at the ground below. She thought of Iraq, of the convoy that had driven into wires she had spotted, of the blast that had torn through steel and men because she had waited for permission. And in that silence she decided. She would not wait. That morning Bravo moved into the valley. The sun climbed slow, painting the ridges in thin gold light. The command tent hummed with calm voices, as if war was not waiting just beyond their sight. Warren watched the screen, satisfied. Blackwood, older now, stood near the back, quiet, his face unreadable. And then her voice came through the radio. Overwatch 2 to command. Hostiles confirmed. Request permission to engage. Warren seized the handset. Negative, maintain position. Observe only. Sir, they're dug in. Crew served. At least 30 fighters. Ambush is imminent. I said hold position, Sergeant. That's an order. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. And then it broke, thunder rolling across the valley, deep and final. The Barrett M82. The first shot tore into the leader crouched by the riverbed. The second into the machine gunner bracing his weapon on a rock. The third into the spotter, mid-signal, his arm raised. The ambush shattered before it began. Fighters panicked, broke cover, opened fire too soon. Marines dove for ground, their lives suddenly balanced on the rhythm of a rifle echoing from the ridge. Warren roared into the mic, but his words were drowned in the thunder. 4 shots. Pause. 3 shots. Ghost shot protocol. Blackwood felt it instantly. The pattern he had once written into doctrine, now alive again in the hands of Catherine Hayes's daughter. The command tent froze. On the screens, Marines scrambled but survived. Insurgents dropped one by one, cut down before their weapons could align. It wasn't chaos. It was precision. And in the valley, where death had been waiting, 32 men kept breathing. Blackwood's chest ached as he watched. Pride and sorrow twisted together. He thought of Catherine. He thought of Harrison. He thought of all the ghosts who had carried this silence before her. And now, here she was, defying orders, carrying their weight, saving men who would never know her name. Warren's voice was cold steel. Overwatch 2, report to command immediately. Her voice came steady, calm. Roger that, 40 minutes. No defiance, no pride, just duty. As the ridge went silent, Blackwood knew this was only the beginning. The battle in the valley was over, but the war between Warren and Phantom had just begun. Because she had proven once again that silence was stronger than orders. And she had proven it with thunder. What do you say to a man who would rather see you fail than see his men live? That was the riddle hanging between Kate Hayes and Major Warren in the aftermath of the valley. The Marines were alive, shaken, dirt-streaked, wide-eyed with the realization of how close they had come, but alive. They moved through the village now, securing ground, gathering what weapons and intel they could. 32 of them breathing in a place where, without her rifle, half would have been gone. And yet in the command tent, Warren's face was carved from stone. You disobeyed a direct order, he said, every word clipped cold. You compromised the integrity of this mission. You undermined my command authority. Kate stood at attention, her Barrett still slung across her back, dust clinging to her uniform. She didn't flinch. She didn't fire back. She only let the silence settle, heavy and deliberate. 32 men, Blackwood said softly from the back, voice like gravel. 32 breathing men who wouldn't be standing if not for her. Warren snapped toward him. With respect, Colonel, this isn't about body counts. This is about the chain of command, discipline, structure. Blackwood's eyes, old and sharp, held him steady. Discipline doesn't mean walking blind into a graveyard. Structure doesn't mean sacrificing men to protect your pride. For a moment, silence thickened, the tent heavy with the sound of equipment humming. Warren's jaw flexed. He turned back to Kate. "You're done here," he said flatly. "Phantom, Hayes, Calloway, whatever you want to call yourself, you're finished. Pack your gear. I'll have you on a flight back by dawn." Kate's voice, when it came, was quiet. "Yes, sir." No protest, no argument, just the same calm she carried on the ridge. But inside, the storm raged. She walked out of the tent, past Marines who looked at her with unspoken gratitude, past the medic who whispered a thank you under his breath. She didn't acknowledge it. She couldn't. Their eyes burned her more than Warren's words, because she didn't save them for gratitude. She didn't even save them for herself. She saved them because she couldn't do otherwise, because her mother's silence lived inside her, because her grandfather's voice still whispered in her bones. "You don't wait, you act." That night, under a sky littered with indifferent stars, Kate sat alone cleaning her rifle. Every groove, every spring, every cold line of steel. It was ritual, not maintenance. A way to keep her hands moving while her mind refused to settle. She thought of Nicaragua, of the fragments of her mother's story. She thought of Iraq, of the boy with the rifle too heavy for his shoulders. She thought of today, the way her shots had rung like thunder, each one pulling men back from the brink. And she thought of Warren. Was he wrong, or was she? She had disobeyed. She had broken orders. If everyone did what she did, the military would collapse under chaos. She knew that. She had studied enough history to understand why discipline mattered, why command mattered. And yet, if she had waited, 32 men would be ghosts tonight. So where was the line? Where did duty end and conscience begin? Her hands stilled on the rifle. She stared at the weapon, at her reflection warped in its steel. She didn't have the answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe that was what it meant to be a ghost. You carried questions no one could answer, choices no one else wanted to make. The tent flap rustled. Blackwood stepped inside, slow, careful, like a man approaching a wounded animal. He said nothing at first, just sat across from her, letting the silence stretch. Finally he spoke. "Do you know why Warren hates you?" Kate didn't look up. "Because I don't obey." "No," Blackwood's voice was softer than she expected. "Because you remind him of everything he is. He's a soldier of structure. You're a soldier of silence. He'll never understand you, and that terrifies him." Kate finally met his eyes. "Then why keep me here? Why not let him send me home?" Blackwood leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "Because this war isn't over, and there are men out there, our men, who will die unless you're on that ridge. Warren will fight you, he'll try to bury you, but when the time comes, you'll act, because that's what ghosts do." Kate wanted to believe him, wanted to believe there was meaning in all this silence, but she only nodded, eyes falling back to the rifle. When Blackwood left, she whispered into the emptiness. "Mom, if you can hear me, tell me how you lived with it. Tell me how you carried the silence without it crushing you." No answer came, only the wind outside, moving like a sigh through the valley. And for the first time in a long time, Kate Hayes felt not like a ghost, but like a woman, broken and alone, trying to survive a war that demanded her humanity as its price. Sometimes, she thought, the hardest battles weren't fought with rifles. They were fought in silence, with the weight of choices no one else could bear. And tomorrow, that silence would return. What if silence was the only voice you had left? That was the thought in Kate Hayes's mind as she lay awake in her cot, the desert cold pressing through the thin canvas walls of the tent. The valley had ended, but the war inside her hadn't. She hadn't been put on the flight back at dawn. Warren wanted her gone, but Blackwood had pulled strings again, kept her name on the roster. She knew it wasn't protection, it was necessity. She was a ghost, and ghosts were used until they broke. The days bled together after that. Patrols, briefings, Warren's contempt like a shadow in every room. And yet the men still looked for her silhouette on the ridges. They still whispered phantom before rolling out, as if her presence was a talisman against death. Kate hated it, the myth, the expectation, but she couldn't erase it. It had grown larger than her, larger than Warren, larger even than Blackwood's quiet watchfulness. She cleaned her rifle until her fingers ached. She read her mother's journal until the numbers blurred. She tried to silence the weight inside her chest, but silence was all she ever found. Then came the mission. It was supposed to be simple, a reconnaissance patrol into a remote valley near the Pakistan border, intelligence suggesting a weapons cache hidden in abandoned compounds. Bravo Company again. Warren insisted on it, his voice calm, his tone rehearsed, as if daring Kate to challenge him. She didn't, she only nodded. On the morning of departure, she checked her rifle with the same care she always had, the steel gleaming in the first light. A young Marine, no older than 20, passed her with nervous eyes. He hesitated, then whispered, "Glad you're with us, Phantom." She gave no reply, she couldn't. By midday, the patrol moved into the valley. It felt wrong immediately. Too quiet, too empty. The mountains pressed close, their shadows long, their silence heavy. Kate watched from the northern ridge, scanning with her scope, her every instinct screaming. Movement, a flicker of light, the curve of a barrel where no barrel should be. She radioed in. Overwatch 2 to command. Multiple hostiles concealed along the eastern ridge, at least 20, setting up interlocking fire. Warren's voice came calm, measured. "Negative, we've cleared this sector. Maintain overwatch, do not engage." Kate's jaw clenched. She saw them clearly, men in loose robes, eyes steady, weapons trained. She could trace the line of fire in her mind, see exactly where Bravo would fall. She pressed the radio again. "Sir, they're preparing to fire if we don't." "Enough," Warren snapped. "Call the SEALs, backup is en route, hold your fire until they arrive." The words cut sharper than any blade. Call the SEALs. Wait. Let the men in the valley bleed until someone else arrived. Kate's breathing slowed. She looked through the scope, saw the first insurgent's finger resting on the trigger. She thought of Iraq, of the convoy that had burned because she'd waited. She thought of the boy, his weapon trembling in his hands, the Marine who had fallen because she'd hesitated. She exhaled. And the Barrett spoke. Thunder rolled across the valley, shaking the air. The insurgent fell before his rifle fired. Another shot. Another man dropped. The ambush shattered in a heartbeat, panic flooding the fighters as they broke cover. The valley erupted, gunfire, shouting, chaos. Bravo scrambled for ground, returning fire with desperate precision. But above it all, her rifle thundered, every shot pulling them back from the edge of death. On the radio, Warren's voice was venom. "Cease fire, Sergeant, that's a direct order." Kate's reply was steady, unshaken. "With respect, sir, orders don't stop bullets." Another shot cracked, another man fell. In the command tent miles away, Blackwood watched the feeds, his chest heavy. He knew this was the breaking point, not just for the mission, for Kate, for Warren, for the ghost shot legacy itself. Because she wasn't just defying an order now, she was rewriting the war. And in that moment, with every shot echoing like thunder across the ridges, Kate Hayes understood something she had been chasing since childhood. She was no longer just her mother's daughter, no longer just Harrison's student, no longer just Phantom. She was the silence itself. And silence, when it finally spoke, could shatter the mountains. How do you measure the cost of silence? That was the question lingering in the air after the valley, when the thunder of her rifle had faded and only echoes remained. Bravo Company lived. They marched back battered, ears ringing but alive, 32 of them. 32 men who would have been carved into memorial walls if she had held her fire. Their eyes found her as they passed, grateful, reverent, wordless. She gave them nothing in return, not a nod, not a smile. She couldn't. Gratitude felt heavier than blame. In the command tent, Warren was a storm contained in human form. His voice lashed across the room, demanding reports, framing her actions as treason. She endangered the mission. She compromised discipline. She undermined every standard we stand on. Blackwood let him rage. He let the fury burn until the silence afterward was louder than the shouting. Only then did he speak. She saved them. You know it. I know it. They know it. You can write your reports. You can bury her file, but you'll never bury the truth. Warren's glare could have cut steel. There's no place in the United States military for ghosts. Not anymore. Blackwood didn't answer. He only turned away, shoulders heavy. He knew Warren was right about one thing. Ghosts didn't belong in official rosters, didn't belong in after-action reports. They existed in shadows, and shadows were never welcome under fluorescent lights. That night Kate sat on the ridge again, her rifle dismantled, her hands tracing the pieces like prayer beads. She wasn't cleaning anymore. She was remembering. The first time her grandfather had placed a rifle in her hands. The day she read her mother's journal for the first time. The silence after her first kill. The silence after the boy. The silence after every mission. The silences had piled up, and tonight they felt crushing. Blackwood approached quietly, sitting beside her without a word. For a long while neither spoke. The mountains stretched black and endless. The stars blinked without care for wars or ghosts. Finally, Kate broke the quiet. I don't know how much longer I can do this. Blackwood studied her face, the exhaustion etched deep. You don't have to. Ghosts aren't meant to last forever. Kate's voice was barely above a whisper. Then why am I still here? His reply came slow, careful. Because until men like Warren send every soldier into valleys like today, someone has to be the silence that speaks when orders fail. You carry what no one else will. That's why. She looked at him then, eyes searching for something, permission, absolution, maybe even an escape. But he gave none of those things, only truth. The next morning, Warren filed his report. Recommended discharge, court-martial, termination of duty. On paper, Kate Hayes ceased to exist. But outside the paper, in the dirt and dust of valleys where men still fought, the whispers lingered. Marines still told stories of a ghost on the ridges. A woman with a rifle whose shots sounded like thunder, whose silence kept them alive. Kate left Afghanistan not as a soldier in uniform but as a shadow slipping away. No ceremony, no recognition, no medals, just departure. On the flight home, she closed her eyes, her mother's journal in her lap, her grandfather's words in her ears. She thought of the men she'd saved. She thought of the ones she hadn't. And she wondered if silence was something a person could ever really put down. When the plane touched down on American soil, no one waited for her. No welcome, no banners, just the quiet hum of a terminal and the heavy weight of memory. She walked alone, but she walked with dignity. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't argue. It doesn't demand to be seen. Sometimes dignity simply acts. And in that silence, Kate Hayes, phantom, ghost, daughter, soldier, disappeared once more.